Hi, my name is David Batsoffen, as if you didn't know by now, and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. And I'm doing a series of In Conversations With, and my guest on In Conversation With today is Melanie Walker. Mel, lovely to chat to you. How are you doing?
Well, I'm really missing out on proper human company, but it's so nice that we do have this kind of technology where we can talk to each other, even if we're not in the flesh. But we are, if you know what I mean. Virtual flesh. There we go.
Virtual. I'm just concerned that once this, whatever this is all over, we won't be able to talk to each other face to face. We're going to be sitting up at a table having coffee and talking on our zooming each other on a phone at a table because we no longer used to human interaction.
I don't know if I'd get that far. I mean, I've lived in various places where I've had the minimum amount of human interaction, well, of my own design, and also because of where I was staying. Like, and then in time I would talk to people. Essentially, was to tell them what they should be doing underwater. Right. So for me, it isn't a strange situation to be locked down, because I've done it to myself in the past quite often, and it hasn't, how shall I say, impacted on my life all that much. I'm still doing the stuff that I used to do. Fortunately, we've been allowed to go out and shoot because we've got a new gardening series coming up on the home channel, brand new, called Beyond the Hedge. Moving on from Gardening 101, I think after 6 seasons of it, I think we've taught enough people enough things on how to kind of garden. So this is actually taking a look at the big grand gardens, a la Monty Don's Italian gardens or Monty Don's French gardens. So it's more a case of having a look at the gardens that generally one wouldn't see, and taking people over the hedge to have a little peep inside, which I think it's quite a nice way of doing it. Some of the gardens are open to the public when they have show gardens. When that's ever going to be allowed to happen again, Lord alone knows. I mean, it's a very strange world that we live in, and I just wish your name was Jack so I could finish the end of the song. But no, it's very much a case of getting so many people asking me now, what can we be growing in our gardens? What can we be doing? Because we're stuck at home. And if you are lucky and blessed enough to have a garden, I think everybody's been looking at the whole idea of food security and lack of food security, although we haven't actually had those problems. I mean, can you imagine in other countries where they have food shortages? In South Africa, our food supply chain is pretty good, but there's nothing wrong with actually looking to the future. And I've been getting involved with a lot of people who are doing community gardens, because that's where we need to be looking at it, not just at our own home gardens, but getting involved with the community groups and making sure that the people who don't have gardens and don't have money have access to fresh food.
Can we just stop there for a moment? Because I know the moment I said Melanie Walker, people are going, hang on a second. Isn't that the woman that?
Yes, and it is that.
Of course, it is. So let us just go back. Let's put that elephant in the room to bed, to mix a metaphor.
Got a big blanket, then, have you?
So tell us a bit about. Well, I know when it was with Scott, it was Skatterjag, but when you did it, it was Treasure Hunt. So what was that? Was sort of the first one of the first reality TV shows on television in South Africa.
Absolutely. It was a game show come reality kind of action show. So if you look at what the reality shows are these days, it's kind of like The Amazing Race combined with a bit of Survivor and Flinkdunk.
How many, now back then, I should imagine there was a lot of secrecy around the back end of that show as to how it worked. But no doubt the pilot knew where he was going because he had to make sure that he could and all of that stuff. And it's all for the drama of it. Just as a matter of interest, and I think there are a lot of people watching who go, I remember the jumpsuit. Where is that jumpsuit? And do you, every now and again, do you put yourself into it and go, I remember the days?
I do indeed. I tell you what, it's the strangest thing. I mean, if you think about the fact that our first season went out in 1988. How many years ago is that? 32 years ago.
Yeah.
And we went through a number of variations of the jumpsuit. I do have all of them. Yes, they still do fit, even after having twins at an advanced age. And I have actually put them on to do things like, at school where they wanted to do a local is lekker thing at the primary school. And I was running around with headphones on and a backpack and pretending like, here we come. And we had a helicopter noise when I came running into the field, which was a couple of years ago. Quite bizarre, but
I should imagine so.
I mean, people always remember, it doesn't matter how long. And the last season we did was in 1994. And I think they repeated it again a couple of times on, like, what was it, SABC Entertainment that went out on the DSTV channel. Right. So it was just, I mean, if you think this was before computers. So everybody was doing everything through books. And the only communication we had was voice communication. So there were no cell phones. So they couldn't like look on a phone, send me a photo of anything. So if we had to do that show again now, there would be a big difference. And people say, would you do it again? Absolutely. 100% I would do it in a heartbeat. Give me a helicopter. You don't even have to pay me. I'll go and have fun.
All right. So now we put that one to bed and everybody can go, sure, so she's still around. So let's look at why I wanted to chat to you today. And you alluded to that with gardens and gardening, and not only fruit and veg, but while you were talking about fruit and veg, I was thinking of the allotment systems that they're having, which don't seem to work here.
Well, mainly because I would say that South Africans, even though we have gardens, we're not a nation of gardeners like they are in England. And because space is very much at a premium, if you think about the way that the majority of the people live, say, in the more urban areas like London, they don't have big gardens. They have these tiny little long, narrow things. And if they are going to use them, they usually have it designed so it doesn't really have a veggie patch in it, or it's a dumping ground for all the stuff that they have at home. So the allotments, I love the whole thing. I used to go and visit them quite a lot. And it's just such a nice vibe when you go in there with all these people sharing their knowledge, growing dahlias. It isn't really just about food when it comes to the allotments over there. But I do believe that community growing, and especially the people, the amount of literature there is at the moment here in South Africa even, about how to grow stuff on your pavements so people can come and just get food when they want it. Right. I love that whole thing. And my partner in crime, Michael Rickoff, who I work with at Lifestyle College, and he's been on the gardening shows with me quite a lot. We do a radio show together. He and I have been guerrilla gardeners for years. We used to go seed bombs, like throw, you take a bit of clay or really clayey soil with lots of seeds in it, throw them over into vacant lots and see what vegetables or flowers will grow. So we're very much into that. We're really thinking about how to take this forward. And we are fortunate that there are things like the slow food movement, who are bringing a lot of the more traditional foodstuffs that were grown in South Africa, not by, I wouldn't say they're indigenous foods. There are some that are fairly indigenous, but it's like rainbow maize. Okay. Right. We're not talking about the one that everybody said, oh, it's got all those different colors, the crystal, whatever they call it. It's one that was grown before the yellow and white maize came in, and it was a lot more productive and it was very uniform and sweeter. This is quite a tough skin one, and it's called rainbow, maybe because of like a rainbow nation, the black and white. There's all the different colors of cream and white and black on this particular maize. And they tracked it down to just one last little field, I think, that was growing somewhere in KZN, in northern KZN. And there's this whole thing afoot now to bring this back because it's got a lot more nutrient value, and it's also an heirloom, as opposed to something which has been bred that you can't grow on from it. Okay. So I'm very excited about that kind of thing, about bringing back traditional foods and indigenous foods, ones that have got a higher nutritional yield. And it's even things like your Rus pendulina, or the Caesia pendulina as it is, and the white curry. The fruit from that, which the birds love, has got more carbohydrate in it than potatoes, and it is edible. So it would be nice to get people, while they're in this kind of state of mind, thinking, what can I plant that is unusual, not just a lemon tree or a bay tree, that will actually provide food?
Can have
Imagine if
growing
we
in your
all
garden,
started
Mel.
growing. Yeah,
if we had all of this growing in your garden.
Yeah, I mean, I've got everything growing in my garden at the moment. It's so much fun. I don't have to really go out and shop for fresh stuff, because I just go outside and pick it.
Well, that's wonderful. But again, if we're not looking at fruit, if we're just looking, people are in lockdown at the moment. They're looking out over a garden that has something or nothing in it. tips have you got for them? You know, can they, on their next 3-hour out exercise, if they walk past their neighbors and they've got succulents growing on the pavement, maybe
grab some.
Yeah, but don't grab the whole plant, people.
Just a piece, just a little piece.
I have a friend who has the most awesome succulents on his pavement. And somebody came along with a spade one evening and removed large quantities of them. And then
there's so much of that happening.
Yeah, and
so
then popped up on a corner not too far away trying to sell them.
Yep. No, well, I mean, you know, people are desperate. These are desperate times. Especially if you've got speckworm growing outside. I'm sure that everybody's just breaking off pieces, because there are succulents are the easiest things to grow. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt. I love the idea of seed swapping, and what we've been doing now is, I mean, I've got this pepperdew plant, which not pepperdew, you've got to call it a sundew, because of course pepperdew is actually the trade name of what you have when they are made that way.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So they're called sundew peppers, and I don't eat peppers except for chili. So I sat here with this bush, which is on its 3rd year, and it's just been producing and producing and producing. So I learned how to pickle them. And I've been bottling and pickling and giving to friends. And the ones that are already dry, I've got all the seeds. So I'm keeping those seeds, and I will be presenting these seeds to people come spring, when it's time for them to grow again, so they can start growing their own as well. There's a whole group of us who are doing this, where we're swapping fruit and vegetables and seeds and
But now are you swapping stuff and saying to somebody, look, these are sundew seeds, or are you just giving them seeds and going, I'm not going to tell you what they are, just plant them in your garden and see what comes up? So maybe when give sort of surprise seeds. And
I will do that to some people, but I know a lot of OCD people, they need to know what it is and they need to know how to plant it. But I mean, the one thing that people, as I said, have been asking me is, while we're in lockdown and we're in our gardens and we want to start growing our own, what shall we do? How do we do it? So I've been giving out a lot of tips to people on our area group, on friends who have been getting hold of me, all the various Facebook. I mean, there's a wealth of amazing knowledge on Facebook with the Urban Farming Initiative. A guy called Thomas Haymans has put that up, and he's got everything from recycling grey water to, I mean, you name it, he's doing it, and how to make your own compost. It's all on there, and it's about kind of small scale farming. There's DIY Garden Design Club, which is basically so that you can go there and ask questions about what plants will be good in what areas and how to design a garden. I see that Leon Klucher, one of our good designers, really good designers here in South Africa, is putting up his little short video clips about different plants and designs as well.
Just talking, Mel, can I stop you there for a moment? When you talk about plants in the garden, I know from experience, if you have, let's say, a fish tank in your house, there are certain fish that don't get on with each other, and much like cats and dogs. Are there plants that if you plant them next to each other, don't get on? I know that may sound a really weird question.
Maybe in kind of, your veggies and your herbs, but that's mainly to do with your crop rotation. If you've planted one type of thing the one year, then you need to move it somewhere else and plant something else that needs different nutrients. So it's mainly to do with your edible plants and what nutrients they'll take out of the soil. But whether they get on or not, I don't think there's very many that will kind of like fight with each other, but there are some that prefer to be next to each other. Like we all know, tomatoes and basil grow very, very happily next to each other.
They also go very well on pizza.
And they go incredibly well on pizza. Sorry, I have a very strange child looking at me at the moment, trying to get them into the garden. But I mean, I just throw things into my garden wherever, and they seem to get on with it and do their own thing. But I do believe in chaos theory gardening, so I'm not too scientific about stuff.
I think that's great. Rather than these very formal straight rows, we did that in our back garden. We don't know what half of what comes up until it comes up, and then we go, where did that come from? I mean, we walked out the other day, there were runner beans. I've been eating beans for like the last 3 weeks. Every time I say to my wife, what are we having for dinner? She goes, beans. And I go, no, but we had beans yesterday. Can't we have peas? She goes, no, they're beans.
So why don't you curry the beans and put them in a jar and keep them in the fridge?
Oh, I never thought of that. There's an idea.
You can do anything like that.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the things that Jane Griffiths and Linda Galvad will immediately say to you is do not plant things in rows, because then it's like a smorgasbord for all of your pests and diseases to come and like they just jump from one to the other. So I like the idea of a garden which is a bit of a jungle. And you don't know what's coming up. And I was, before lockdown, I visited a friend and she said, I'm sure I planted some ginger over here. I wonder where it is. So it's a case of, it is quite nice to have that, the hidden treasures, and getting onto that now that lockdown has lifted to level 4, although even under level 5, the seed suppliers were allowed to deliver seeds, even though you couldn't buy them in some shops for God knows what reason. That was absolutely ridiculous. Living seeds and sought after seedlings, Frenchy Cementi, they were delivering. So you could start your seedlings off. If you're starting a garden now, you would need to go to a center and go and get seedlings. For most of the things, it is too late to actually just kind of start seeding and throwing in there. All right, so you'd need to start cultivating inside first of all. But bulbs are now back on the shelves, which is fantastic. Hideko have been given the all clear.
Right.
And they've been supplying the garden centers, and they're doing quite a nice range. I've just done a blog on, well, not a blog, a podcast with Charles Barnhern from Hideko about how to get the best out of your bulbs. And this is the perfect time to be planting them. The ground temperatures have come down. And yes, you're not going to get immediate satisfaction unless you're buying, say, from one of the supermarkets and they're already force grown and you can bring them into the house. But this, if you go and you plant your little treasures now, okay, they will come through in spring. And imagine at the end of lockdown, the end of a really grey, cold winter, to suddenly have these bursts of colour popping out either on your patio, on your balcony, or in your garden. I honestly cannot say, don't get bulbs. Go out and get bulbs. Put them everywhere.
Because it's not only for people with gardens, because if you live in an apartment and you have a balcony, or even if you're just in an apartment that has a very sunny window ledge, I'm sure that there are a variety of different indigenous plants and flowers that you can plant in that, no?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you're looking at bulbs, the thing is you need to, I'm just talking about bulbs now, I'll go into the other stuff in a moment. With bulbs, you can grow a lot of them indoors, okay? And they do tell you which ones, but they need bright light. But the things like your Sparaxis, Tritonias, your Ixias, all your South African indigenous plants, they get quite tall. So you're looking at something that might come up to 1 meter. So you really do need to look on the back of the pack and see height-wise, because otherwise you're going to have this little pot like this with this incredibly long flower and stalk, and it's going to look a bit odd. So your muscari, grape hyacinths, those kind of things, some liliums, you can grow those quite successfully in pots, indoors. And your amaryllis will only come in a little bit later. But you get the little mini daffodils, which you can put onto a windowsill, which you can buy in store at the moment. But the ones that you buy in bulb form definitely need to be, if they're the mini ones, you can put them into a small pot, but otherwise outside. They need those cold temperatures to actually force the flowering.
Now, you mentioned speckworm. And for some reason, much like at the moment, these Facebook challenges, post a picture of your dog, no caption, no description, no anything. And you go, why? What is the point? So there was the speckworm challenge that everybody went mad about, which seems to have died off now. But what was the rationale behind singling out speckworm?
Well, speckworm is one of the 2 plants which is actually very, very special. And speckworm, of course, is indigenous to South Africa. So it's a carbon scrubber. And the other one, by the way, which is why it makes such a great houseplant as well, is your mother-in-law's tongue, the Sansevieria, because they put out oxygen all day and all night. Because I'm sure that we all know by the stage, if we did biology at school, even in primary school, that plants take in the carbon dioxide during the day and put out oxygen, but the majority of them then swap at nighttime, and they start taking in oxygen and putting out carbon dioxide. But those are the 2 plants that don't. They really suck in carbon dioxide and all the bad stuff in the air. That's why I love speckworm. And apart from anything else, it is so nice to eat. You get like quite a few different varieties, but one of them just has that wonderful taste. Remember, like those little clover that we used to eat when we were kids, the 3-leaf clovers, and they got that tart taste.
Okay.
Fantastic. I love eating them. They're so good. But I was shooting, because we're allowed out to shoot again at the moment, so under strict conditions. It's
Right.
quite bizarre. Obviously, when we're shooting, I can't wear a mask. People are saying, but you're not wearing a mask. I'm like, well, we're still keeping the social distancing going, so don't worry. And we had our temperatures taken and everything when we arrive at the place. So it's all under control. But at the Saxon rooftop garden, because of course, when David Higgs was still there, they decided, no, for the restaurant, we are now putting in on top of the garage, this wonderful rooftop garden, which Linda Galvad installed with all of her Franciscamenti heirloom seeds. And we were there the other day, and it thinks that it was still summer on top of that roof. I'm telling you now. There were Leonotus in flowers. There was still baby marrows and trombone, which is those big squashes, growing madly, the little curcumelons. And the speckworm on that roof are 6 feet tall, 7 foot tall.
Wow.
I've never seen such big speckworm in my life, because, of course, David would use it in a puree to have with venison. But that would be kind of like his star of the show, making this amazing speckworm puree.
But
it was just so nice to see.
Yeah, I was wandering around our garden recently.
Yeah.
And I discovered that we have a speckworm in our garden. I was absolutely unaware of it. And I said to my wife,
they kind of pop out, eh?
But because we
do
changed
tend to
the
do
majority
a
of our
thing.
garden to succulents, because they're just easier, and from a water-wise perspective, they're better than planting. I don't want to call them alien species, invader species. One day,
Exotics.
Exotics. One day I will put sicklebush into my garden, because they tell me it's a pioneer species, and I don't have to drive a Land Rover through my garden.
Well, whatever blows your skirt up, mate. You can put whatever you want in your garden. No, but I mean, I've got so many different kind of areas in my garden. Very shady space, and I've got a very sunny space, which has got bricks around it. So I've really delineated my garden into different sections. So I've, like, the perfect part in my back garden has got its own little veggie patch. Then I've got a little mini forest. Now I've got a really small garden. Don't forget Parkhurst, really small property. Front garden, I've got an entire succulent section in the really hot sunny spot. But on the other side of that courtyard, it's completely shady. So it's all shady plants down the one side. I tend not to water my plants unless they're in pots, or if I've just planted them. Right. And they just do their own thing. You know, it's I like succulents because they propagate themselves like crazy.
They do,
and you don't have to look after them.
No,
that's all.
They the epitome of what every child should aspire to be. You can just get some food and then go and do your own thing and leave mom and dad alone.
Wishful thinking. Wishful, I tell you.
Well, is there anything that people shouldn't be planting? Are there plants that are not good in the garden, or they're just not worth the effort type of thing?
Look, I mean, obviously, if you can, go Indigenous as much as possible. But I'm not an Indigenous Nazi. Sorry, I'm like, you're going to look up my nose in a moment. I'm not an Indigenous Nazi, so I'm not going to say to you only buy Indigenous plants, because I've got a lot of plants in my garden that aren't Indigenous. I absolutely love them. They have, each plant in my garden has a memory for me. Who planted it? Because I mean, I've been living here 40-something years. It was my parents' house, so there's plants here that remind me of my mom. You know, each plant has a memory for me, so I love doing that. I would obviously don't plant anything on the invasives list. And that's very easy to find online. Well, you won't be able to buy them in shops if it's an invader. Okay, so often you have people coming in and, oh, I want this plant, and you say, well, you can't have it, and they, why? And because it's in like category 1 invader, and they're very upset about the fact that they can't have it. I would also say that if you're doing your fruit and veggie gardening at the moment, obviously what's available in shops is what you should be planting now.
You're right.
So don't try and plant your squashes or your capsicums, you know, or green peppers and chilies or tomatoes, or any of the solanums, which would be your peppers, eggplants, What else? I'm trying to think what else there are. Those are all summer vegetables. So you can't grow them now unless you have like a greenhouse or a hothouse and you are keeping your whole thing controlled, the temperature control and everything. But there's so much that you can be growing at this time of the year, and you really do need to be led by what is actually in the shops and available to be done. The one thing I'm not going to grow again, and I was talking to Charles at Hideko about this, is potatoes. They take too long. I'm growing sweet potatoes because you can just cut off a piece of this that starts growing. For some reason, if you don't eat your sweet potato, it starts growing in your veggie rack. Just go and plant it. I mean, mine's already taking over half my garden, which is fantastic. But potatoes they take long, and the one lot that I did try, the yield was not fantastic.
We bought some bags to keep potatoes and onions and vegetables. It's like a black bag, a dark bag.
Yeah.
So it keeps the light, them out of the light, and it stops them sprouting. So that your potatoes last a little longer before they turn into mini gardens by themselves. But the interesting thing for us was we had some gem squash in one of those bags. We forgot about them. And when we opened, they'd lost all the chlorophyll. So they'd gone from green to orange. They tasted exactly the same, but they'd lost the outer coloring. It was so weird.
Plants will do that, and I loved it with Arthur Miniker, he's also an amazing designer, and he was a teacher at Lifestyle College. He always used to say that people are here, plants are there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, plants do their own thing. We can vanish off the face of Earth, and I'm telling you now, plants will sit there and they'll look at it and they'll just go, okay, time for us to come back again.
Plants and insects, and you like me are a bush person. And if you go out into the bush and you hear the stories from the guides, or in your case, because that's your background, what those plants are capable of doing. Trees that produce extra tannin when they're downwind
for the giraffes,
those type of things. We have no idea. We think they're innate, non-sentient beings that we can treat with almost disdain. But little do we know that they are probably going to rise up and grow over us one day. Well, they will. If we get buried, they will definitely grow over us.
The day of the Triffids is coming, I tell you. It was a very interesting experiment I saw many years ago in probably one of those Life magazines, Lifetime Life books, where they went and they put on like an EEG sensor onto a plant, and then they went and they boiled some prawns that were alive, which is very cruel, but so they took these live prawns. I mean, they do that with crayfish and lobster anyway, and they registered what was happening with the plant when they did this right next to them with the prawns. It went off the scale, the stress levels from the plant. So I mean, I don't know if that's just anecdotal or if it actually happened, but I mean, it was in a science magazine.
I seem to remember they did a similar experiment using music. There'd be soothing classical music, loud rock music, country music, and the plant reacted differently to each genre of music.
Yeah, they like rock music the best, like us.
We love rock and roll. Talking about rock and roll, what about the insect-eating plants like Venus flytraps and those sort of things? Do they grow here? I know you can buy them in small pots.
Yeah.
But you can't really grow them in your garden, can you?
No. They are ones that do need a lot of looking after. I mean, I've just managed to kill them, to be honest with you. And I felt really bad about it because each plant that I kill, I feel bad because it's that little plant for me has a soul. Right. And I look after it like I do our children, Yeah. And they are quite finicky because most of them are kind of forest, subtropical forest or bog plants. So they're not particularly happy living even indoors unless you have them in the right conditions. So unless you are, like with a fish, if you're going to have an aquarium, which is a saltwater aquarium, and here in Johannesburg, it was much easier when I lived in Setswana and I had one there. I could just refresh the water the whole time. Yeah. But here in Johannesburg, you have to be so pernickety about how you do it, and you have to be OCD. Yeah. I'd say that with the insectivorous or carnivorous plants, you would really need to kind of stay on board with them and make sure that you're looking after them properly. I think I killed mine with kindness, though. I was trying to feed them all the time.
obese Venus flytraps.
Yeah, one of those ones. Because I've got my face full of flies.
How many flies can you fit in your mouth? Are there any, I know he says, restarting the sentence all over again. I know that with flowers, there's certain flowers that you shouldn't put in a bouquet together. Supposedly red and white, yeah, because of bandages and blood. Are there plants that you should and or shouldn't be giving as gifts because they represent something good, bad, or even evil?
No, I think the only one that I've really heard of course, is the red and white, as you said, because it's also associated with funerals.
Yes.
I would also say don't give people dead plants.
No, you must try and give them living ones.
Yeah, but I like giving people an actual plant because then they'll have something which keeps on growing. Yeah. But if you do want to give people flowers, I think it basically just goes down to taste. Like, I mean, for instance, I can't send lilies to my mother because the scent of the lily makes her feel quite nauseated.
Okay.
And she seems to be quite allergic to them. So you really do need to find out what people are allergic to, what they like. Some people might hate the color yellow. So don't give them a yellow flower. It all boils down to personal taste. And yes, there is a language of flowers. There is a language of the colors, and each color means something, and each flower means something. So you could go into that, but I think a lot of that has been lost. It was very much a wartime thing. We're talking about not this current pandemic war or the Gulf War. We're talking about like World War II, World War I.
Yeah, proper wars. One was fought in black and white, and the other one was in Technicolor. But
in Technicolor, and now we're seeing one against an unseen enemy. Yeah,
exactly. And there's also, of course, indigenous plants. My favorite at the moment, and I in fact had it tattooed on my calf, is the buffalo thorn, Ziziphus. Because there's a whole cultural story behind that, and it's very prominent in Zulu culture. For what it's in the areas in which it's used, and it was meaningful to me. So I had 3 strands of that tattooed on my calf to represent my wife, my daughter, and I. And often when I go on game drives, the guards, I can see them looking at my leg, and they sort of go, "What is this?" And I'll go, "No, you tell me. This is the biology part of the game drive. You tell me what's on my leg." But I don't expect people to go out and get tattooed, get their favorite flower and or plant tattooed on themselves.
Well, if your favorite plant is a tree, it might be difficult, okay, because a lot of the trees kind of look very much the same. And my favorite is the Natal lavender, or the Heteropexis natalensis, mainly because it gets that white bark. We use it, we suggest to people to use it instead of using, say, a silver birch. Okay. But I love the smell of the leaves. They've got this, that's why it's called the lavender tree. It's got this almost slightly lemony lavender smell on the leaves. And of course, the leaves in late autumn also go red before they drop off. It is a beautiful tree. They suggest it for small gardens. I have seen them getting up to at least 15, 20 meters tall. So if you are going to plant it in your small garden, make sure it's on the south side of the house.
Right.
But I mean, there's so many amazing indigenous trees. And for a long, long time, there was this antipathy towards your indigenous plants because they always thought, oh no, they look scruffy. That was a big thing where people didn't want them in their gardens. They look scruffy. We can't make them look nice and tidy. And I suppose you look at plumbago, but I mean, you can make a plumbago hedge. And one of my favorite things is if somebody's got a hedge and it's a bit threadbare, you know, quite a tall hedge, and you can see through it. Grow the plumbago so the plumbago goes all the way through the hedge, and then you have these blue spots on the hedge as well. So there's ways of getting around it, you know.
Yeah, I always joke with game drives with the tree spotters, because there's always one person on the game vehicle that really likes trees, and I go, you know, it's not a big deal. It's not like looking for lion or leopard or even pangolin for that matter.
Yeah,
there's a tree. It's there today. If we come back past tomorrow, that same tree is going to be in exactly the same position. Ad nauseum. But then I did a drive with a guy in KwaZulu-Natal on his reserve. and it must have been a 4-hour drive, and he was a tree specialist. I didn't realize it when we set off. And when he started on the trees, I thought, this is going to be long and boring. And there were nice ellies, and he never stopped for the ellies. He only stopped for the trees. And at the end of the 4 hours, I was gobsmacked by what I'd learned and how much trees, well, not only how important trees are in nature, but each individual tree has so much that it can tell you and teach you.
Yes.
That I've stopped ridiculing or passing judgment on people who go, ooh, ah, when they see a knobthorn or want to hug every baobab they see, type of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people will say to me, what tree is this? And I'm like, I'm not an arborist, okay? I'm like a generalist. I'm not a specialist in one field. I know a lot about a lot, but I'm not the world's best when it comes to every single tree, because I'm not a botanist. You need to go and get somebody who's a specialist in that. But it reminds, like, the stories of trees are fantastic. And quite a few years back, I interviewed a guy who actually is a photojournalist or a journalist, Temba Fukude. And apart from that, I don't know if he was a photojournalist, but he wrote this book called The Tree. He was the tree poet. So he wrote about the poetry of trees, and not just about how they are beautiful things, but how they fitted into the politics and what trees meant to African people, like your blue gums, how that was used in mining. So of course it became a symbol of the oppressor in a way. And whatever the tree was that the headmaster at the school would use, the branch of to give you a clap across the back of the legs.
Quince, they used to make those canes out of quince trees. Because
yes,
they're very
that's
flexible.
it, out of quince trees.
Very flexible.
So he had stories for all of the trees. And I mean, if you think about when the townships, as they were back in the day, when like Soweto was put together, each house was actually built and had 2 fruit trees planted in it. A lot of those trees, unfortunately, got cut down for wood somewhere along. And it wasn't just in Soweto. I mean, I know that in Parkhurst, there would also be like a plum tree and an apple tree. Back in the days when you didn't tell people you lived in Parkhurst because it was like the dodgy area in town. But it's nice that you hear the stories. Like I've been following the Ubuntu project, which is Tim Abar. And Tim is just the most amazing person when it comes to being aware of growing food and food security. And I've just done a story on him as well, where he now will deliver boxes of food he's got all the people in Orange Farm growing. So they come and you order, they come and they deliver. And with each of those boxes, part of the money goes to putting together a starter box kit to go to an underprivileged family, and he will teach them how to grow their own food. So you're then paying it forward as well. So, you hear about all of these stories of people, how they're growing, and how he started. Why I got onto this is because he sat there and thought, well, I don't want to be poor anymore. And he thought, well, let me start growing things. And he used to pay all the kids in the area to go and get all of the empty, thrown away cool drink bottles, cut them down, and he started growing his little trees in there. But of course, nurseries wouldn't buy them because they were in, cool drink bottles. So he decided to start giving them to all the people in his area. And now in his area in Orange Farm, everybody is growing fruit trees.
That's because wonderful. Mel, I'm going to leave us there on that story because I think it's a nice way to end off our chat. Thank you so very much. But before I say goodbye, is there any way that do you have a website? I know that you've written books. How do people get hold of you? Where do people watch your TV programs?
Okay. Well, the best thing is if you go to Facebook to Mel's Treasures. Okay, so it's not just about growing things and plants. It's about stuff which I find interesting. My podcasts go up there as well. And those aren't just about, Grounded is kind of the podcast radio show that I put out, which I did for 13 years now. And I'm still keeping going with that. So you can find it there. The podcasts are there. And you can send me messages on there as well. I do garden consults for people. I'm not a landscaper, so I don't come and install, but I'll come and give you all the advice that you need. very, very competitively priced, I think is how they put it. And also just helping people to get in touch with other people and to change their mind, even if they just need to know if their soil is good. You know, I get messages saying, how do I do it? I go around, I give them full consult for an hour, and sometimes it usually goes longer, and then a list of what they would do in their garden, how to change things around, where to plant things, etc., so they can do it themselves, which we're having to do pretty much at the moment until many gardeners are allowed back. The new garden show, which is coming up, Beyond the Hedge, will be on the home channel, which is 176 on DSTV, and it's available on all of the packages. So even if you have the real cheapy package, you can still get it there. And otherwise through Lifestyle College. I mean, I'm still very involved with Lifestyle, running their garden club for them. It's a nice little garden club as well. So there's and then also Lifestyle Garden Club on Facebook as well. So there's lots of different platforms. These days it's so easy to get hold of people. You know,
I know you can run, but you can't hide.
No, you can't. And I've actually just put a thing up because I was getting a bit worried. You know, we're also worried about humans and this virus, but then we also have to remember that before this came, there was a nationwide furor about the shot-hole borer, which, trust me, is still munching away on our trees.
I don't want to even. We're going to come back to that on a different chat because it's sort of faded into the background.
Well, I put a whole thing up. I put a thing up on the Lifestyle Garden Club page to say, this is what you need to look out for. And of course, if anybody has any problems, I mean, I'm allowed to go around and do consults to see if the tree is falling apart, just as an added bonus, and say, right, this is what I think you should be doing as soon as we are allowed out of our cages.
Fair enough. Mel, thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been wonderful to see you and to chat to you once more.
And you as well. So good to see another human.
And we now have to do that very silly wave that everybody does at the end of the Zoom conference. For whatever reason, you've got to wave. I was chatting to Melanie Walker in conversation with.